Thank you. Prime Minister, you have the floor, please.
Yeah, just give me 10 seconds. I'm setting up my time.
Perfect. And you're audible, so no need for me to confirm anymore.
In which case, I'll be taking my PYs verbally, and I'll begin on the reverse count. I can't see the chat, so nothing there. I'll begin on the reverse count of 3, 2, 1. Despite the predominance of aggressive content in modern societies, which actively endangers the scope for change that minorities have access to, side opposition would have you granting more legitimacy to public figures who spearhead societal devolution, push conservative ideology, and reduce the effectiveness of liberal media platforms. 3 levels of framing for you, Pan. Firstly, understand our stance. When we tell you that these regressively opinionated public figures are not interviewed on liberal media platforms anymore, these platforms still do instead call out public figures who are pushing this type of ideology. This tells you 2 things. A, call-out mechanisms continue to exist on OG for this type of regressive content, which means you still continue to get a wide amount of engagement with it. And B, opposition bench cannot push the idea of discourse because at worst, that's parallel, but then at best, we'll be coming to how you get better quality discourse on our side of the house in our argumentation. Of discourse, secondly, because understand that regressive ideology is already implicit, is already an implicit part of society insofar as it is propagated by multiple understand that regressive what does that mean? Probably to a large extent, any random person within society is consuming a large amount of regressive content in day-to-day life, even in the absence of these media figures, insofar as institutions like religion, institutions like academia, and institutions like just your parents in general who come from an entirely different mindset are actively pushing certain types of narratives based on their experiences or based on their beliefs, which means you are exposed to a lot more regressive ideology at all points in time than liberal ideology. Why is this important? 2 things under this. A, it means that liberal media platforms act as a counter narrative in the status quo, which is to say that insofar as the majority of the content that I'm consuming as any random citizen within society is regressive, it is very, very important that liberal media platforms do not end up giving more leeway to these conservative platforms, but are instead able to push a liberal narrative to a sufficiently large extent that it is able to counter existing regressive norms. This is particularly relevant in the debate insofar as the only way in which you get stuff like effective policy making by governments or effective social change in regards to the types of narratives that people buy into is in case you're able to get liberal ideas being propagated. Liberal media is the most effective form of doing it. On the other side of the house, you get liberal media being a lot less effective insofar as it is diluted, insofar as it ends up giving a platform to people who are likely to push ideas that are actively contradictory with the idea of liberal media, which means the first impact that we're able to introduce for you in this debate is simply that liberal media and the messaging it brings with it is a lot less effective. But then on the first argument, what we're also able to tell you then is that insofar as you want to be able to counter these active norms, this debate occurs in 2 worlds. One, the developed world, wherein probably a lot of these liberal media platforms still do get enough coverage, and therefore, to some extent, it's fine, even if they only are going to be doing extensive call-out mechanisms of people who do regressive content, which means in this case, it's still a marginal benefit that puts us over the other side. But the binary in developing nations is such that you are at all points in time surrounded by regressive content to the extent that for most people, it is the only type of content you buy into. Insofar as that is true, the effectiveness as liberal content is the most important thing, because within these types of countries, stuff like women's rights or the rights of the LGBTQ community are at the lowest point within all of society. Within these types of societies, you need to be able to get the most effective type of discourse and the most effective type of pushing of liberal ideas in order to counter existing norms that are actively bad for those who are the most vulnerable. Therefore, we're able to prove to you that within both developing and developed countries, liberal media act as a counter narrative and is therefore good for social change. Secondly, understand that by giving a platform to people that liberal media platforms actively end up fighting against or actively are criticizing at all points in time, to the extent that your liberal media platforms are trying to tell you a person like Donald Trump or a person like Andrew Tate is simply not a credible figure within society. You should not buy into any of the ideologies that they're pushing, because that is the obligation of liberal media insofar as it needs to be able to push a certain type of ideology within society. And then at the same time, you are allowing for these same type of people to be able to go onto your platforms and share their type of thinking, even if it happens in the form of a debate, means that these people and these institutions that are actively propagating regressive content end up getting a lot more legitimacy, even if it's in the form of stuff like debates. This is bad because A, again, it dilutes the effectiveness of liberal media platforms in call-out mechanisms against people like Andrew Tate, but then B, as a whole, these people are also able to get a lot more coverage and are able to access larger platforms to push the type of bad messaging that actively stops effective social change. But then also understand, thirdly, there's two unique harms that we're only going to be able to prevent in case you're going to support side proposition. Firstly, institutions like Donald Trump and Andrew Tate are actively bad for people who are harmed by regressive views, which is to say, the idea of safe space creation is something that you're exclusively able to get on our side of the house. On a basic level, who is it that watches the liberal media platforms to the largest extent? Mostly people who buy into liberal ideology and who probably are, in some cases, a victim of being discriminated by regressive systems. So, in most cases, within liberal societies, you've got people like women or the LGBTQ community tuning into a platform like the BBC in order to hear types of thinking that is not actively derogatory towards their personal experiences or towards the personal lives that they live, and still able to give them some form of information. And that's why they opt into it. Now, understand what happens on the comparative. On the other side of the house, people like Andrew Tate are suddenly coming on the BBC and being interviewed. Even if it's true, the BBC is also actively telling you everything Andrew Tate is saying is bad. I'm still having to listen to Andrew Tate say very, very bad things that are personally offensive to the type of experiences that I have gone through. At the same time, I am very, very vulnerable within society. I've had a very I've been constantly suppressed by structural boundaries. Listen to I simply do not access the same level of education. I'm actively discriminated, and so on. Which means that it's very, very important. I am very, very vulnerable within society. Liberal media had a very the only platform that can give me. I lose that by structural boundaries. Listen to I simply do not access the same level of education. I'm actively discriminated, and so on. Which means that it's very, very important. Understand that what we're also waiting for you on a principal concept only platform. On the other side, it is the people who are the most vulnerable within society who are unable to access any media platform and so pushing any idea. Understand that what we're also waiting for you some example of attacks that are personal. On the other side, these are people who are the most vulnerable level who are unable to access any media platform and so pushing any idea. Very, very limited position of comparatively of attacks that are personal. On the other side, liberal media access is also limited and is a lot more effective. Second thing, the other side gives you legitimacy of being a very activist pushing on regressive condition. Third side gives you counter the idea that this is what liberal media access is also limited and is a lot more effective. Telling you that the legitimate second the other side gives you legitimacy of being a very activist pushing on regressive condition. Third side gives you counter the idea that this is what liberal media access is able to guarantee. Finally, the second the other side gives you legitimacy of being a lot more activist pushing on regressive and policymakers to buy for change.
Thank you very much, OG. Now welcome leader of opposition.
Give me a few minutes to set up my timer and drink water.
Call out public.
Okay.
A few seconds, I'm sorry. Pronoun she, her, POS, true voice, preferably during the first minute. Not badger. Starting my speech. 3, 2, 1. Go. Opening government comes into this debate saying that, hey, we're going to suddenly have a safe space because like we remove like these regressive ideals in like liberal medias, because we tell you right then, what is the incentive of liberal media in the first place, right? Firstly, it's to paint both sides of the story for progressive views. Because what happens, right, when we leave out these people with regressive views, we tell you that this is going to be bad insofar as you leave out the like people who believe in these progressive views ultimately out of society. You lessen the like chances of them actually being able to like, I don't know, develop progressive ideologies because they're able to like understand the nuances of things and whatnot. Because we tell you that on their side of the house, they're probably going to get slower progression. Why then? Because the incentives of the liberal media are catered to. A few pieces of rebuttals then, right? Firstly, they talk about how they're going to legitimacy and then like regressive views are still going to have a call-out mechanism. Okay, let's bite the bullet and say that, hey, they get this, but we tell you that it'll probably be minimal at best. Why that? Because recognize that liberal media still has a lot more influence. They also told us that liberal media gives more leeway if we like interview these people, right? We tell you that just because we interview them and whatnot, we'll suddenly give them like, I don't know, the power to like have people like have a huge chunk of people suddenly believe in ideas ideologies, because we tell you that the incentive of the liberal media is to actually like push for regressive ideas, but also acknowledge that hey, there are regressive ideas, because we tell you that's not going to be like, it's going to be hard for you to actually push for progressive ideas if you completely miss out, or if you completely like fail to acknowledge that there are people with regressive views out there. You're not going to be able to like make them realize that these views are probably going to be harmful in the long run. This leads me to my first argument, my first principled argument that engages with government's case about the incentive of liberal media. Because what's the problem? The problem is liberal media stands for progression in society to have progressive views. Because how will we able ask yourselves this, how will we be able to progress as a society when you fail to acknowledge those people who believe in this regressive views? Because what happens when you leave these people out there is that they create like even more echo chambers for themselves. They fail to acknowledge like why are their progressive ideals bad in the first place, and we tell you that it's something that's going to be like really harmful for them in the long run, because you aren't going to get a progressive society. You're essentially leaving out these people with regressive views. It's just going to be bad for everyone in the long run, because what happens when we like continue to interview these people? What does this do? Firstly, it shows us or acknowledges that these people, like we acknowledge these people who have the same ideologies. We recognize they have these views, and as liberal media, we act as checks and balances for these types of things, right? Now, why is this exclusive on our side? That we tell it on government's paradigm, there will be no checks and balances, as people will be too indulged into what they believe in. Because we tell that the liberal media will become like a checks and balances, will act as like that institution that's going to essentially show us that hey, this regressive views exist, but at the same time, it's important for you to acknowledge that times are changing. Therefore, we need to adopt like more progressive ideas that's actually going to benefit society as a whole. Second argument then, right, on the extent of pushing of ideologies. Because what's the problem? What happens when you don't show I don't know, Donald Trump or Andrew Tate in these like huge media companies? We tell you that the believers are going to like find even more ways, even these like people who have these regressive views, even more ways to like spread their advocacies and spread their ideologies and whatnot. It's going to be more harmful insofar as the extent that the believers, and not only the believers, but also these people who are pushing for these extremely harmful ideologies is going to be far more harmful on their side of the house than right. Because what happens? How does this affect like the neutral observers of society, or like the people who are probably neutral about this, right? Because firstly, they're more likely to listen. Second, echo chambers are going to be more prominent on their side of the house. There's going to be more aggressive ideologies. That's something that's going to be bad for society then, right? We tell you that like the extent of pushing is going to be so harmful because they're probably going to like infiltrate like smaller like media sites. That's going to be even more harmful for society, because you can't like, it's only going to add into like more people that's believing in like these progressive views and ideologies and all those things. And you tell in the long run, it's not going to be sustainable. Rather, it's going to be more counterproductive on their side of the house. Because if you don't show these people, or you don't like acknowledge that hey, these ideologies exist, then you're not going to get any progression. You're not going to get any like, I don't know, safe space creation that government wants to talk us to, that government wants to tell us about, right? Now, like, what's the solution then, right? It's essentially just like show or continue interviewing these people in the media, because we tell it at least on our side of the house, mitigation is far more likely to happen insofar as again there's checks and balances of the liberal institution that's happening. We show that these people have regressive values. People who are watching will probably like recognize that hey, okay, I understand them and things and whatnot, and you're going to like call them out for it. We tell you that the call out mechanism that like government wants to co-op, we tell you that's like on our side that's still going to be something that's going to be much like better. Like the magnitude of our side is still going to be much more better on the government side of the house, because even if like they get these call-out mechanisms, it's only going to be a small scale, versus in our world, right, it's going to be a bigger scale, because this is literally liberal media that we're talking about, right? Secondly, on irreversible harms, we tell it's going to be harder to push for progressive ideals on their side of the house, because at the end of the day, people will be too deep into it. People will probably just like, I don't know, trap themselves in their own little bubbles anymore, and for all those reasons and more, proud to post things.
Okay, guys, please notice the time for POIs. When it's out of order, it's out of order. And speakers, if you're not taking a PI, just let them know so they stop badgering your speech. Thank you, Elo, for that lovely speech. You're welcome, DPM.
Um, yeah, I hope I'm clearly audible.
Yes, you are.
All right. Just give me a second to set up my demo. Okay. Starting my speech in 3, 2, 1. I don't think opposition has really engaged with a large chunk of our case, also known as our counterfactual. Because I think that one counterfactual that we gave you at first, with so much analysis, really takes down the entire case. Three things in the speech. First, in terms of rebuttal. Second, an extension on accountability and better quality discourse. And third, on the weighing of the content we gave you. First thing, then, in terms of responses. Their main push was just echo chambers. The fact that, like, now the public will fail to realize progressive use. But our whole argument about balance of narratives was based on this, the fact that there's a need for a counter narrative, which is where liberal media companies come in. The fact that on our side, the liberal media is the one that is calling out these people. On your side, they don't. Why is this the case? First, because exclusively we think liberal media platforms are the ones who call out these people. But when they're interviewing them and don't call them out during the interview and Raja just listen, it's a lot harder to then call these figures out based on what they said, since they're the ones who wanted to hear the story so badly. That is why it's on our side where it's a lot easier to call people out, and it's a lot harder on their side to call people out. This was a whole counterfactual they needed to engage. But second, in terms of these checks and balances, I really don't get why this is exclusive, right? Like, the reasoning is just that the media is suddenly going to be like, times are changing, so we should be progressive. This is exactly what they said, and this makes zero sense. Like, presumably the media is still calling you out. Like, these liberal media companies are still engaging with what is going on in the world. They have incentives to cater to the vast majority of people. They obviously want to discuss these issues, so they're still going to be discussing them. The difference is, on our side, they're calling out these people for the ants, for, like, say, Kanye West, for the anti-Semitic comments he makes, or like on their side they're going to be interviewing Kanye. Kanye is going to be able to give some sob story or further propagate these views which harms the victims they wanted to talk about. But second, in terms of pursuing ideologies, their push was that advocacy is suddenly going to be a lot more harmful as people can push more harmful ideas. But this actually happens on their side, because on their side, they're the ones who give them the platforms to do this even more. They get to interact on their side with a completely new audience. Those of liberal media companies, we don't do that. But third, in terms of the, like, incentives of liberal media, their claim was that the liberal media should bring both sides of the story for progressive use. But we think you obviously still have information on both sides of the story, and you still give a nuanced view of it on our side with the liberal media. We don't know why it's so necessary then to interview them. We think you can still have discourse on the issue, and I'm going to even prove to you why we get better quality discourse on our side of the house. And even at their best, when they do get discourse, why it's so much worse. In terms of interviewing them, because, like, giving them the power to believe them, we think this is highly untrue, right? You have so many people watching the media. You have younger children who now think that Andrew Tate is quote unquote cool because they were so impressionable that they found the interview funny. They think his comments are cool. This is absolutely abhorrent. What needs to be discussed is, like, the misogynistic comments that Andrew Tate makes. You don't want impressionable minors to be thinking he's cool and funny and make memes out of the interview, destroying the whole point of it. Second thing, then, in terms of extensions on accountability and better quality discourse. Why do we think interviewing these figures is particularly harmful in terms of holding them accountable? Notice that this will directly respond to each and every claim we've got from them. Because at the point at which they're being interviewed, they're able to influence a very large group of people. And usually in these interviews may say discriminatory things which could be harmful or could justify their actions. This is simply just because the media is a really large audience. They obviously want to cater to it. So they're probably going to be, like, making the interview exciting, things like that. However, because of the interview, the way the narrative unfolds is not by saying things like, oh, has done this and this is terrible and we should hold them accountable for it. It manifests in the way where it's seen as a trend and a fad, and the figure is seen as cool. This looks at the usage of memes, etc., during the interview, as media companies have the incentive of catering to their speakers and viewers, so they probably won't call them out during the interview but rather laugh and go ahead with it. So after the interview, that's when you have, like, memes and jokes being made about this. This is further damning because this is exactly the type of thing that perpetuates the making of memes or jokes out of the interview instead of actually focusing on the harms or the bad decisions these speakers have made. That's when it becomes a lot harder to hold figures like Andrew Tate etc. accountable when so many minors find him funny and make memes on him. On the comparative, at the point at which you call out these people, that's when you're more likely to like see the kinds of damage that these figures have done. That's when you're questioning the actions they've done and you're able to hold them accountable for it. You're able to call them out exclusively on our side of the house because you're not the ones who interviewed that person and just laughed along with whatever he said. You're not the one who did that. These are other media platforms. You directly provide a counter narrative on our side. This is why you get the two types of discourse. That is when you're able to get the full story, and it's not like on every single media platform you're getting these sort of repressive comments. But you think that's when the public is able to actually gain a nuanced view of the thing in the first place. Before I move on to the wing, POI from closing. Okay, seeing none. Weighing of the content then in terms of what we gave you. We gave you 6 arguments. First, likelihood of change. Secondly, counter narrative of liberal media. Third, accountability. Fourth, propagating harmful views and why that's so harmful for, say, victims. Fifth, in terms of balanced discourse. And sixth, in terms of safe spaces. Why are these then on weighing? The most important thing, weighing out anything that the closing half may say. Firstly, in terms of scale of impact, we told you how these repressive comments affect things on a much larger scale. It's not just the viewers, but also things like the balance of discourse and the whole overplay of how the issue is seen, how it affects things like accountability for the person, and how it's so necessary to have the counter narrative that is calling out these people for the wrongdoings they're doing. But second, I think in terms of depth of impact, because we analyzed for you why this is so harmful for things like the quality of discourse itself. Note that any harms that closing wants to talk about are contingent on proving these two things and come logically after this. In terms of vulnerability, how the most vulnerable victims are the ones who have safe spaces and are protected on our side of the house when they're still able to get a nuanced view. Because it's not like the liberal media company just stop talking about this. I think this is a bizarre assumption that opposition has had that we just completely ignore the existence of these people. No, we don't. We call them out. That was our whole counterfactual. But fourthly, I think in weighing in terms of long term and short term, we told you how in the long term it's a lot easier to hold these individuals accountable because now you're questioning their actions and it's not like just laughing ahead with them in the interview or making memes out of them. We think the counter narrative is so important to call them out to avoid just justifying whatever they're doing or making it seem like a trend. Incredibly proud to propose.
Thank you very much for that speech, and welcome to DLO to round up the opening half. Deputy Leader of Opposition.
Hello, I'm DLO. I'm sorry. I'll just fix my timer and drink water because I'm sick.
Fine.
So yeah,
Let's go.
thank you. Hi, I'm back. So, uh, let's fix this and then okay. I will start my speech. Pronounce he him. POIs through chat. Through chat. Don't unmute. Don't badger. POIs through chat. Pronounce he him. I'll start my speech in 3, 2, 1. The only way you counter conservatism is by directly engaging on it, by disproving it. A few clarifications and responses before I go on to my extensions. One, they fail to understand the meaning of interviews. Interviews are not merely listening or giving them platforms to actually create their own monologue. This is what they get on their side when these characters actually post their videos on the internet. They proliferate their own media on social media, and they get this time of monologue. They get distraction online without the proper counter checks and balances that we provide within an interview, within an interviewer. They also try and say that we give more leeway to push conservative platforms, and it contradicts liberal ideas. They are actually contradicting here because liberal ideas means that you listen from like both sides of the house and you delineate what is good, what is bad. You take what is good and leave behind what is bad. You don't do that when you only call the people from the other side out. That will do nothing. I will go on to that later. One, they want to counter and just call them out, and two, vulnerable. They say that vulnerable people will get hurt watching them on the news. One, this is illogical because vulnerable people don't really get their information from the news. I will prove this to you more on later. They get it from social media. That is most likely to be infiltrated by these media, by these problematic people on Gov side. Because again, you don't give them the television platforms, the platforms that are mediated, the platforms with interviewers. People on top are still somehow conservative. That's why you need to cater to them. When you shackle them out of these platforms, you inherently shackle the peace that can be gotten from it. They also want to push that, oh, we provide a balance of narratives and accountability. But their only mechanism on this is calling people. How will this balance of narratives and accountability be gotten when you call people out? I still don't understand. The only thing this will do is make this narrative a them against us narrative, or a conservative versus a liberal narrative, which will go nowhere, which will only lead to like unproductive discourses at the end of the day. That does not provide solvency at the end of the day. Our counterfactual is clear here. Our interviews are not merely monologues. That's what you get on social media, on government. On our side, we delineate and understand the good and the bad, and we dissect
UI.
it. So we can actually, I said through chat, and we can actually like provide these mechanisms so we can actually get the good and leave out the bad for the regression of of the world on government side. Again, note that on both sides there will be platforms of media that will cater to these people. The major difference is that on your side, these platforms, the platforms that these people use, and the media they proliferate can be more manipulative and coercive because there is no mediating factor to their ideologies. Three negative impacts to this. One, people that will likely listen to this will just blindly believe, but because there is no counterfactual, there is no counter argument to each point that this problematic person will say. Two, there are stronger inclinations like fanboys, because and there will be no change or less change on your side because you get less progressiveness because people are not incentivized to actually listen to your media because you're merely calling them out, you're merely calling them stupid and wrong without proving the analysis on why. This looks like teens supporting Andrew Tate even if he has sexual allegations because they see Andrew Tate as a victim of society, a victim that just wants their progressive views out but is shackled by the media, by that is antagonized by the media. You don't get the main progressive idea from the person itself. This is again where our counterfactual comes in, where we delineate the good from the bad, and we get the good and leave the bad on our side. We actually, the absence of discourse is the presence of regression and conservatism on your side. A few extensions then, before my weighing. One, engaging on the
Hello, you
incentives and
stopped being audible, or is it just me?
Oh, we can
hello.
hear him.
It's just you.
Okay. Sorry, but I can hear everyone else.
Hello, hello, hello.
You are audible now. Please continue.
Where did you last hear my speech?
You were talking about how the call out is being ineffective, basically.
Ooh, you called out being ineffective. Uh, did I get to my counterfactual part already within your notes?
Oh yeah. You did. You did.
So is it like the three negative impacts of uh
Yeah,
like
just like a few seconds back from where you stopped. Not too
okay,
long.
okay,
Just
okay.
seconds.
Okay, okay. I'll start my speech again. I believe I have 3 minutes left. Okay. Rest. I'll go back to my speech in three, two, one. Third analysis is you don't get the main progressive idea from the person itself. This is where our counterfactual comes in, wherein we delineate the good from the bad. We get the good and we leave the bad as a progressive media. That is why we are very important, because we actually give solvency to this issue. We actually solve the problem of problematic people and the people that are idolizing them. The absence of discourse is the presence of regression and conservatism. A few extensions then before on my weighing. Firstly, engaging on the incentives and principle of the liberal media companies further. One, on the economic aspect, it is undeniable that these media companies have an inherent profit incentive. One, because they want their company to continue functioning, and two, because they have a lot of liberal media company competitors. This means that even if the other conservative media companies can't interview them, you as a liberal one has the unique capacity and opportunity to do so. That is why we want to take over this opportunity and actually promote our media company within it. These are not limited to basic interviews, but can also be done in publicly facilitated debates with professionals. This looks like Piers Morgan or like other debaters actually like having prior discussions and discourses with people like on Andrew Tate. Two impacts to this. One, not only a more fundamental and diverse discourse, but two, a more comprehensive one at that. Because note that we get better perceptions for these media companies. The second extension is the problem in society right now is that these media platforms are getting less and less relevant. Why? Because of the same mechanism that Gov gives. It is because they cherry pick what part of narratives they want to show in media, which leads to the perception of people that these media platforms are merely biased and not central to the actual perceptions of people on the ground. Before I continue, any POIs from closing? 3, 2,
Yeah, I have a POI.
go.
All right. Why do we need a celebrity there to deal with the ideals that they push?
What do you mean a celebrity? It's not a celebrity. It's a person who has their own specific ideologies. Andrew Tate, Donald Trump, they are not examples of celebrities. They are examples of people with like conservative views or like views that are not like similar to other liberal people. You merely misunderstand this motion. I don't know where you're going at. Which leads again to the exclusive impacts that you get on OO. Only on OO are you central to the proximate incentives of the liberal company. One, you promote their economic growth. You promote them over other liberal companies that are scared to do so. Once we make these interviews good, once we make actual proper discussions that will go trending, this will be far better than the comparative on government, wherein you just get monologues from these problematic people on social media that will be watched by these children. Note that these children are more proximate to social media anyways. That harm is far worse on government side. Only on OO also do you win on multiple facets that OG and the closing benches will try to impact on, like the economic aspect, like the competition aspect, and many other factors that my LO already told you. For all those reasons and more, very, very proud to oppose. Thanks.
I'm sorry for the interruptions. Thank you very much, DLO, for that lovely speech. You welcome the member of government.
All right. Can you hear me?
Perfectly.
All right. In that case, give me a minute to get my timer out. All right. He/him pronouns. I will take POIs verbally. And in that case, I'll begin my speech on the reverse count of 3, 2, 1. I think this debate is necessarily flawed insofar as we never actually deal with the fact like people like Tate and Trump don't really care about the ideologies that they push. We can literally concede everything that we've heard so far, but the premise of it is inherently misconstrued because we don't really care about their specific incentives. I'll explain what I mean by this in my first extension, but before that, some rebuttals to OO. First, we hear this analysis on how liberal media needs to paint both sides. We will paint both sides, but the unique analysis here is that we don't necessarily need to let Tate or Trump spew rhetoric and take advantage of insecure people to deal with the ideologies that they push. Again, what OG has told you, cult mechanisms still exist. I don't feel like regurgitating what they said. The analysis here is that you don't necessarily need a celebrity or a person there to call them out, i.e., You don't need Tate there to call him out, but uniquely, you can also still deal with the ideologies or the misogyny that he pushes without him there. Again, Josh, note that there's a misconception coming from the op bench that hasn't been cleared up. Insofar as we won't completely be ignoring conservatives. We actually enjoy meaningful discourse with conservatives and opposing views. But the key thing here is that the discourse should be meaningful, i.e., the burden in this debate isn't to prove that we should never have interviews of conflicting view or any type of discourse. What it is, however, is that Andrew Tate would not be meaningful discourse. Now, on social media, I think this point actually sort of goes to us, because if you platform then in mainstream liberal media, you probably have the same impacts of social media, except this time you'll have Andrew Tate destroys BBC as the caption. You legitimize them. Additionally, you're talking about how you have professional debates and Piers Morgan interviewing Andrew Tate. This is bad because Tate's popularity skyrocketed. Now on capacity, this point really makes no sense, i.e., regardless of what media platform it is, we believe that Andrew Tate should not be platformed, i.e., we believe that his views are predatory and clear-cut for negative society, right? Now, on my unique extension on what are the incentives of people like Tate and Trump, but I'll take a POI before that from closing. Opening, 5, 4.
All your arguments are against Andrew Tate. Please engage on how this affects media and how this affects public perception towards
Okay.
that liberal media
Got
company.
you. Okay, so I've just been rebutting so far. Andrew Tate has been my example, right? All of this analysis stands independent of him. We believe that this regressive views, these people often don't lead to meaningful discourse, and that's what I'm going to be proving. So now let's move on to my extension, which generalized. What are the incentives of people like Trump, Andrew Tate, and generally these people who spew these regressive views? We need to characterize these people, and that's why I'm grounding it. Celebrities like Andrew Tate and Trump are glorified and idolized by their audiences. They gain these audiences and grow their audiences by actually knowing them, and more importantly, knowing their insecurities. When you look at Andrew Tate, by the way, which is an example, he preyed on several young men's innate vulnerabilities and insecurities, and he grew through exploiting that. Insofar as most people who spew these regressive views use insecurity as a mechanism for growth of popularity, right? The analysis here then is that when your audience is gained and grown through preying on insecurities, the way you do it is not through facts, calm discussions, because under that calm and collected discussion on both sides, with two people actually trying to reach a consensus, their claims fall apart. This is something we concede, which is exactly why they will not lead to meaningful discourse, because they cannot have calm and clean discussion. The outcome of this then is that they project their lifestyles and rhetoric as facts. They use anecdotal evidence and harmful bullshit, and then they prey on people who already feel like they're not enough. This is even more amplified insofar as they use the strategy of creating a common enemy. This strategy is particularly harmful because they normally fabricate the impact of this common enemy and then spew hate, which has real impact on these communities, right? But this is something that has been said before. The unique analysis here is that they take advantage of these insecurities and then create an outlet of blame for the vulnerable people, all while placing themselves as the fucking messiah, and then they profit off of it. This is the key incentive that we give you. For all of these people, there's a vested interest for them to actively profit off of it. This looks like Andrew Tate realizing the insecurity in young men unable to find a partner, and then using it to villainize these women, and then creating further insecurities by telling them that they're not enough, and then selling a bullshit course to profit. This looks like your 50,000 self-help gurus following his footsteps, telling you the only way to appeal to these terrible modern women is through having a boatload of money, and the only way to do that is through their course. This looks like Donald Trump telling people that the immigrants will come over borders, that they're taking jobs, that they're committing crimes, and then converting that into campaign donations, right? The analysis here is that all of these people have a clear vested interest that leads to profit for themselves, right? And they use these regressive views as a means to an end. This means that uniquely, they do not care about your facts. They do not care about your rock solid reasoning. They care about using your platform not to discuss, but to find more insecure people to commercialize. I'll take a PY before I move on. Last chance.
All the analysis you gave all hinges again on the person's past. You still don't engage with the debate about ideologies and how being a bad person correlates to being a stupid person. Please engage.
All right, we're telling you that often, right, the reason why they have this rhetoric is so that they can have some sort of benefit off of it, right? And we've given you examples and we've given you the underlying reason behind those examples. We've told you that these people have vested interests that lead in benefits for themselves and they're not likely to have discourse, right? This is the reframing that comes from CG and it exists upstream of anything brought up so far. Then judge what happens in these media channels is sure, there is a call-out mechanism, but that doesn't matter because these celebrities or people with these aggressive ideologies are not there to justify their actions or their thoughts, but they are there to spew their rhetoric and gain popularity. Insofar as then judge, we believe that it's more important for liberal media sources, especially as the only realistic counter-narrative in several societies, to use their platform to further change by actually taking down the ideologies that they go hand in hand with. Then, Josh, the comparative that we give you is that on our side, we deal with the dialogue that they propagate and the ideologies that they push, rather than giving them a platform for them to push their ideologies and create profit and gain for themselves. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much, member of government, call out the member of opposition.
Okay. Am I audible and visible?
Yes.
I'll take a POI through chats, and obviously at the around 5-minute mark, I'll try and take one, and I shall prioritize opening over closing if I get two. Other than that, the next time I speak, my speech will begin. Hello. We think there's a huge misconception, an idea of why these news media outlets would ask these regressive or conservative people to come on their show. There's a huge misconception on government side because they think this is how the scenario looks like. Hello, Andrew Tate, would you like to come on our show to advertise your course? That's not how the dynamic works. It's, hello, Andrew Tate, could you please answer for your facts that you have been caught for human trafficking, and could you please answer a couple of questions? In the first case scenario, most of these conservative people do not want to go to liberal media and newspapers in the first place, right? If you go to like an oil CEO and ask them, why did you fire 1,000 people? And would you like to come to our people and talk about why you got a severance package of $10 million? And could you confront a minor that you have fired? They will say no to that, right? They don't want to be in these liberal medias. They're not using that to actually platform, and rather the actual call-out mechanism we have is much better because the confrontation is we have the advantage of the home ground, we have the advantage of creating the narrative, and it is in response to conservative news outlets such as Piers Morgan, such as Parker Carlson, and confronting our liberal side, confronting vegetarians and eating steak in front of them, trying to attack, right? We tell you we are different from O for a couple of reasons. We say we are playing fire by engaging properly with the other side because we wanted to provide the best point of view from our side and also confront it, right? Secondly, we tell you we have a better actual accountability on our side by putting a place to this thing rather than giving a call-out mechanism of providing some speech and then analysis rather than actually confronting Trump. And we think that is a better call-out mechanism because on both sides, you still see Trump on CNN, right? They still showed CNN and Trump. So if that's a huge call, we don't think it was much better to actually pose questions and actually ask more about their issues. Secondly, we also say that it's not about deleting good and bad. It's about actually providing the best point of view from your side and actually trolling you again, actually preventing that. And we told you that with better engagement overall on our side in ratings and in viewership. So let's go on to this argument and how this gone, right? Most of it, I'll start with OG, right? OG gives you these main three substantive points that really are harnessed, right? They tell you, A, you will have less headcount because these liberal previews will now actually be turned off to these whole ideas and we will not want to engage into that. So we respond to this in a couple of things. We think that echo chambers, we differ from OO in this sense. Echo chambers are very symmetric on both sides, unfortunately, right? You say in the CG brings up the idea of a BBC destroyed by Andrew Tate, right? The rhetoric from that is, of course, in TikTok, you see a lot of these male supporters who do that, right? But there's also a lot of other news, a lot of other probably liberal-minded people who have the comments saying that actually, no, depending on the editing of how you look at it, BBC won, right? There is already an echo chamber existing on both sides. The difference is that we have a better way of actually calling out these members because when you come to on our side, rather than using a speech or interview, you are in Fox News, right, such as Donald Trump, you have to actually claim here and actually discuss with people that are affected and have better knowledge of the situation that present your point of view, right? There's a huge misunderstanding as if this is going to be a platform for them to advocate for their side and they have going to be allowed to do this. That is completely false and we have to make sure that's unknown, right? Secondly, about the diluting of the message, right? They simply think, obviously, in this meeting, that will be okay. You know what, Donald Trump, you know what, CEO who's fired 1,000 people, you get your opportunity to tell you. No, the reason these interviews are held in the first place are response to controversies. There's a reason why they would look out for these people to specifically ask them what they thought about it, how do they think the effects are. And at the end of the day, most of these defenses will be not the greatest, will be actually controversial. If you ask Andrew Tate about his views on feminism, if you ask Andrew Tate about the ideas of migration and immigration, right? And this show of a liberal point of view, where that is most left-leaning audience, they will look at the response from Donald Trump or these people as a ridiculous assumptions and only supports our case and makes them worse, right? Because we are a liberal audience and we think those kind of responses of xenophobia and the ideas like job declining are false in that sense. So we have to have better engagement on our side because we actually see a better presentation of our side of our points that are not actually shown on the other side. Because like you said, even if they have calling out mechanisms, the best way they can do is actually taking interviews or actually speeches that they have in their own space, in their own ways, right? We unfortunately think that's detrimental, and we think the fact that if these people are willing to come on our shows, we have the advantage of setting up questions, of specifically asking about investigation, and specifically going in the past, which we also say this is a response to conservative media. When you see the rise of Tucker Carlson and Piers Morgan, they specifically go and find the liberal points of view and specifically criticize them and specifically show them, right? This is the reason why you see Piers Morgan made a separate YouTube channel and he gets billions of views now, right? Because in the world of social media and TikTok, those kind of clips get it, right? Piers Morgan destroys the thing that we tell you we need to act by fire and fire, and even in developing countries, you see the same thing. I think there's a famous meme of the "Why are you gay" meme from Uganda. Obviously, we can think that's kind of funny, but in that actual scenario, if you watch the whole interview, this LGBT member, this trans member, went on the show to provide their perspective, right, on the conservative media in Uganda. However, they told them that Pastor Semple wouldn't come and you would be asked to be respectful, but they actually went against them. Pastor Semple talked about sexual transmitted infections, diseases. This happens in the conservative side because they understand the value of bringing out the other side and making them look as worse as possible in the sense, right? We are the only team to tell you that these kind of interviews, these kind of things are used to actually show the worst case scenario, how illogical these people are in the audience of your own people who actually want to support these ideals in the first place. Secondly, on the engagement, we have another thing, right? When you say BBC destroyed Andrew Tate, we told you that these actually now conservative people. I'll take the POI shortly. These conservative people actually now have to come to the BBC side, which only increases traffic, which only increases engagement in the comments, because rather than this segmentation of the ideas, now you are forced to be on the same page, and now you're forced to call out each other rather than distinct. That's mutually beneficial on our side because we are giving them a choice to actually speak up on our media. I'll take the PLA from OG.
You have calling out mechanisms by discussing the issue without letting the figure have a public platform where on your side they can justify themselves or portray even more harmful views. We outlined to you why then it becomes harder to call them out. Please engage with the reasoning we gave you.
You're saying that, okay, if Donald Trump comes out and tells you the justification of the Mexican wall, suddenly the left-leaning audience, suddenly the interview will be like, you know what, that's a really good point. We can't think about it. We already know Trump is going to build these walls. We already know Trump is against these anti-immigration walls, right? It's a place for him to tell that point and then us to question him why he thinks that, why doesn't realize the economy is going down because of other factors of international action. So we unfortunately think that's not uniquely beneficial on your side, because if you're calling them out just through that thing, you already know the fact that they're doing that. You already know that what Donald Trump's views are. We tell you, we have the choice to actually ask him to answer questions that we can specifically choose. So unfortunately, we do have better calling mechanism. So we take the advantage on that side. On the idea the idea of like progressiveness and this idea to perform platform, we think that is largely correct. However, we tell you that we're not against echo chambers in the sense. We are telling you that we have better calling out mechanism because rather than focusing on second-hand resources, we have the primary hand of actually asking them ourselves and formulating the things, right? And a huge misconception all teams have is suddenly how these right-wing people will want to come on CNN or BBC. Most people would decline the option, right? So this we think is a unique benefit where we tell you that the confrontation is still better. We still have better engagement because we are at least making sure the left-leaning people, their kind of views and that they were proved right are better shown. Because even if you agree that that suddenly the right-wing ideas are so powerful and they're the only ones that people are going to listen, then you can see that there's no point of argument, even though that's false. Because obviously these political different ideologies have very different ways of how to approach it. So you all find your own arguments wrong. So you'll think that this person is actually just ridiculous rather than the other side. And for all these reasons, we're very proud to oppose this motion, and they should be allowed to interview right-wing people. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for that lovely speech. You now welcome the whip of government.
Yeah, give me a second to set up my timer. Okay. Verbal POIs, she, her pronouns.
realistically, Donald Trump and Andrew Tate are not completely stupid as much as we like to think so, right? We all need to concede to this and concede to the fact that their words do have an impact. And when you bring them into popular liberal media channels, they know how to get people to buy into their crap. 4 things I'll do for you today. First of all, I'll point out a key piece of framing that all teams seem to miss. Second of all, I'll talk about why we win over 0-0. Third of all, I'll talk about how we win over closing opposition. And finally, I'll talk about our winning over OG and how we win overall, and clashes will be integrated. Okay, in terms of framing, you do not need Donald Trump screaming his hatred for immigrants on a BBC news channel to talk about regressive views, right? BBC can still call him out because he will say this either way, right? You can still call him out without letting him in to interview him because he knows his audience, he knows what he needs to say in order to get people to believe him. And if you let him on there, he will be able to twist the viewers, right? He will be able to twist the minds of the viewers. And you can still talk about him, you can still call him out without him being there. And because the fact of the matter is, Donald Trump does not need to be on BBC in order or CNN in order to talk about his views, right? He will still talk about it, and you can call him out by showing him talking about it and not having him there because he knows what he needs to say, right? Without BBC, Andrew Tate is still out there and has other methods of talking about his views, right? You can still call him out, but when you spotlight him, when you bring him in, you make him important and you give him legitimacy. That is the issue. Okay, moving on to how we win over opening opposition, right? Since OG doesn't properly rebut them, I'll do so. They say that liberal media needs to paint both sides, right? But they won't
POI.
be painting both sides equally because these are bad people who are in some way smart and will use bad methods to get people to listen, right? They won't be just explaining their views properly. They will be manipulating their target audience, right? Because these, again, are not good people. And they also say something about how you need to realize that they're not going to realize their views are harmful. You need like checks and balances, and like these regressive views exist. We can do this better in other methods. People will still, you can still show their harmful views and you can still prove them wrong on your news channel without having them there. I don't get what's so hard to understand about that, right? They will still talk, and they will Donald Trump will still be talking about their bullshit, but not be spotlighted on liberal media. We can still call them out without bringing them here. And I don't get how their whole checks and balances thing works, and their whole thing about how you point out regressive views exist. It will just be like a
POI.
conservative versus liberal, but people will still know these regressive views exist. We don't need to interview them. I don't really get what opening opposition is trying to say. And they also say something about how you infiltrate smaller media sites and but they don't explain why this is bad, right? You spotlight them on big media sites. That is especially bad because nobody will give a shit about some random reporter no one has heard of versus a famous liberal media channel, right? They also say something about how calling them out gives no accountability. It's just a conservative versus liberal fight. But I don't really see what this, how whatever they're saying, what
POI.
this achieves, right? They say, I'll take you later. They say that the entire debate, whether or not they're there, is still about regressive conservative versus liberal, whether they're getting interviewed or not. I don't see why this is different on our side. It's always going to be a regressive conservative versus liberal fight. They are not going to be willing to listen, and you will not get a good discussion. They also say something that like people will listen and blindly believe because no, we can still call them out. You don't just call them stupid. You listen to what they say themselves and you call them out. Just because you're not having them there in an interview, it doesn't mean you can't call them out. And they also say that it could be like public debates and with professionals like Piers Morgan. I just think this completely destroys their case because Piers Morgan interviewed Andrew Tate, and Andrew Tate destroyed him, right? He got, as you'd say, more fanboys. They also say that you're like you can't be biased
POI?
in liberal media channels, but you can. This is the entire point of liberal media channels. I don't know why they're trying to protect these regressive views. And they say that like people see social media. Yeah, they do see social media. And do you know what they see? They see reels like Andrew Tate shuts Piers Morgan up. That is what they see, and that
POI.
is what they'll be convinced of. Before I move on to see, oh yes, I'll take that POI.
Sure, you can call him out, but using your mechanism, why would people from their audience listen to you as a liberal media company, independent of the interview, independent of the person himself?
People do watch BBC because they want to see this, right? Even if you have the name like Andrew Tate in whatever you're talking about, you will still get these views, right? You don't need him to be there. I don't know, like BBC, I think is more famous than Andrew Tate will ever be, right? People will still watch BBC. You don't need his name there, and if you have his name there, you don't need him to physically be there to talk. You can still call him out. Okay. moving on to CO. They say that the discussion is not, oh, hey, Andrew Tate sells his course, but it's why are you human trafficking? This is true. Yes, that's the incentive of these liberal news company, but it clearly isn't effective because the issue is that in reality, we are not living in a utopia because they know how to twist their word. They know how to change the conversation. Andrew Tate will know how to change the conversation to selling his course. They also say that, like, of course, in TikTok, you see that there are like other news, and some say people will say that BBC wrong. Again, I think they're living in a complete utopia because yes, some people like this, but they're the minority. You see this very rarely, right? Most TikToks will actually be on the side of Andrew Tate, and very few people will be defending BBC. And CO doesn't seem to
POI.
offer anything new other than a few derivative rebuttals. I will not take any more POIs. Please stop badgering. And they also say that if you asked Andrew Tate about feminism, people would look at the response and realize that they're like his responses are ridiculous. But Andrew Tate already talks about feminism in the status quo, right? And he has tons of support on this. He did talk about feminism in BBC, and he destroyed BBC. He got more support. I don't know why you'd use this as an example. They also say that BBC understands how to make people as worse as possible. They'll show illogical people. This just isn't true. Andrew Tate also knows how to seem as smart as possible, right? It's not just right-wing people. It's regressive people knowing what to do, knowing what to say. Now, moving on to what we bring to this debate, right? OG's talks about some like legitimacy and accountability and some impacts without actual analysis, right? We give you this analysis, the incentives of Andrew Tate and Donald Trump, and whether they actually know what to say, right? They understand their audience, they prey on their insecurities and manipulate them, like how Donald Trump created a common enemy with Mexican immigrants by framing them as rapists and using rhetoric to tell you to protect your sisters or friends, right? These are just examples, as Veer said. We're not attacking like just them, and I don't know why other teams don't seem to understand the use of examples, but they use this manipulation for personal reasons, which means that when they go on the media to talk about their views and opinions, they will not engage with whatever BBC has to say. And since we're the only team that has talked about this and engaged with the most important stakeholders, these public figures, and how bad they are, that is why we take this debate. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that speech and welcome to Position Whip.
Am I audible?
Up. Okay, yes, you are now.
Thank you. I'm going to start at 3. This debate is simply not what the government bench is trying to tell you, right? First of all, 2 important distinctions that we have to make really, really clear, right? Our unique extension is not only that the fact that these companies are inherently profit driven, meaning that whatever they do to enhance their profit is ultimately their foremost important goal. Second, it's not that these companies are simply dumbasses that they're going to let them come to their shows and spew their hatred and pretty much do nothing to defend them. We think that the home ground advantage and the specificity of journalism and the fact that these people can actually hold them ground is going to be ultimately what wins this debate. But before I go to that, I'm first going to do some actual government bench, like what exactly they're trying to say and why this is completely wrong, right? So ultimately what they're trying to say is that, giving them platform is going to be bad and it's also going to be a lot of turnout for a lot of liberal stances. Why this is really, really unlikely, right? Notice here how the government framework only works under these presumptions, right? That these interviews are going to be successful in the sense that the interviewees are going to be the ones that are destroying the actual companies, right? We tell you this is exclusively why this is wrong, right? As far as we believe that these media companies are competent enough, they should and they will be able to prop up their side and defend their ground. But also these interviews will be likely to be picked based upon the likeliness of their succeeding, meaning that the turnoff that they speak of simply does not exist, because on no circumstances will liberal media companies pick interviews that will purposely make them look bad or pick people who they know they simply cannot fight against. And even if they do pick them, will still give you benefits, right? Secondly, why this is supported is because these interviews are ultimately going to be happening on their side with their bias coverage or on their own tactics and traps, meaning that there is a significantly higher chance that these people that they interview are going to be held accountable directly and going to be in a gotcha trap where they have to answer for it and be more accountable rather than sitting on their own comfort and having time to actually think of the arguments that they're going to make, meaning that these people most likely will be able to have traps that they're going to be shown to be dismissible, okay? Then, third point, right? Why this is then so beneficial if this actually succeeds? It's not necessarily because Why so beneficial, right? Because as long as we believe that these tactics do indeed work, that the messages that the opposition are going to bring up are going to be significantly dismissed and significantly undermine them, right? So ultimately, what this means is that actually beyond that, right, the whole government bench also fails to mention that their own liberal public figures are going to be interviewed on conservative sides, meaning that there are also two harms that are being propped here, right? So immediately, this means that they're going to be attacked and dismissed by your own network, calling them cowards, right? Because your networks are not interviewing certain people. They think you cannot defend yourself, right? They think their views are incompetent, or do you think they think they can only? They think if they bring their interviewers, they're actually going to lose, right? This in itself loses credibility for your own liberal media source, making them seem super biased, meaning that the people who are in the average citizens, not simply just liberal media, not simply just liberal people, are also going to lose like credibility in your own news network, right? Then this is the second problem that this is also going to pop up is now because these liberal public figures are being interviewed by the conservative news coverage, they're going to be seen as more engaging, which means that these conservative news coverage are going to be seen as better news competition, which means ultimately this is also another layer of burden that the liberal media are going to do when they do not actually actively engage with these people. Then so ultimately this boils down to this, right? They keep telling you that calling them out is simply enough engagement. We tell you this is not true. We already have to. This has been proven by multiple benches, but we have proved to you significantly more by the reason that direct engagement and active face-to-face engagement works so much better because this is a homegrown turf, and because this is much more engaging as the answers are coming directly, as we're putting them on the spot to answer directly for their mistakes and faults, right? But that's even if for the very, very best case scenario for their side, right, where these interviews do go wrong, we tell you that the first liberals, their opinions simply will not change because their opinions are not something that is easily interchangeable just because a certain person just tells them that they're destroys the interview or whatever, right? Even if we do not buy this, right? Ultimately, this is not easily this is not something an average person will see and be like, oh, Andrew Tate is completely right, or Donald Trump is completely right. Why? Because even in this current status quo, we already know that Andrew Tate is a bad person and he scams people and he manipulates people. We already know that Donald Trump has been impeached and he's in prison. We already know these things about these people, meaning that these people who come to the interviews, everybody is going to look them with a grain of salt. They're already in the perception of a bad image, meaning that these people are inherently at a disadvantage. That's why we are going to hammer them down so that any support that they have is already pre-existing ones, which means the harm that you're talking about is largely symmetrical at best. And by the likely chance that we do succeed, that this is not only going to bring more credibility to our news network, this is also going to bring more profit and more engagement, right? This is the unique extension of closing opposition, right? We tell you that this home ground advantage, bringing more engagement, is ultimately what is going to bring more viewership. Why this is true is for two reasons. Controversy is innately more engaging and more profitable, and more likely that more people will going to watch. Why is this true? Because obviously, if you're engaging with a certain other party, that means you're inviting the other party's viewers to come watch your show and see how the interview is going. That in itself already proves to you why we are going to have more viewers, right? But why are the people in your side also going to watch it? Because obviously, people in your side wants to see your interviewers actually destroy the interviewees, right? They obviously want to see your opinions. They want to see your direct attacks against these people being actually shown and being televised, right? They obviously want your side to win. Therefore, this in itself is already a huge enough engagement on both sides. Yes, I'll take the POI.
All right, it's not that in a logic versus logic battle, your interviewers will lose. It's that these people do not engage with your interviewers on a logic battle. Rather, they use rhetoric even in these interviews.
Okay, two things on that, right? These people are so smart that they're somehow going to manipulate you without logic and tell you like buzzwords. Why this is going to be wrong in two cases? We think that the average person is not dumb enough to actually fall for these tactics. Even if they are dumb enough to fall for these tactics, we believe that if they are already prevalent to these tactics, these people are most likely already part of the conservative media and already part of the harms that we have talked about that are already pre-existing, meaning that on both sides this is largely symmetrical because people simply will not change by simple words, right? But on the best case scenario, what is going to happen is because the lack of logic, because of the reason that these people are not engaging, they're going to be seen as unresponsive, and they're going to be seen as people who cannot engage on proper logic. Rather, they resolve to simple manipulation tactics. That in itself already proves to you why these people are most likely not going to succeed, is because now they're shown in a platform where not only this is a platform of independency, which means they have their proper ground, this is a bias towards a liberal stance, which means these people are going to be shown in a very bad light, which only puts spotlight on their negative aspects, especially the lack of void of logic in their arguments, meaning that ultimately the harms that are going to be coming from the conservative side are going to be way worse on their side, because ultimately these people not giving the chance for them to actually ruin their own selves are going to be a huge mistake that the opposition simply cannot take. For these reasons, we are very proud to propose.
Thank you very much. Upweep. And to this, we come to the end of the debate, which is quite an interesting round. Okay, the host, would you like to stop the recording now, or so everyone, thank you for the debate. Please leave the room while we deliberate and announce the result later on. Thank you.